Welcome to In Dialogue, Smithsonian Objects and Social Justice. This is a collaborative program that's hosted by educators from the National Portrait Gallery and this month, the National Postal Museum. So our essential question or our guiding question for this evening is, how do ongoing environmental efforts inspire us to engage and take action in our communities and beyond? So we're going to explore this question in relationship to a 1934 stamp from the Federal Duck Stamp Program and a 2019 portrait of marine biologist Julie Packard by the artist Hope Gangloff. My name is Brianna White. I'm the head of education for the National Portrait Gallery. I'm thrilled to be with you all this evening, and I am joined by many colleagues who will in turn introduce themselves. But right now I'm going to hand it over to Phoebe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phoebe Sherman, and I am the Student and Teacher Programs Manager here in Washington, D.C. at the National Postal Museum.
Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. I am Brianna's colleague at the National Portrait Gallery, and I'm going to be in the background today managing the slides and just helping out technically with the program. So nice, happy to be here with all of you today.
Thank you. Jerry.
Hi, I'm Jerry, Provost Lyons. I also work at the Portrait Gallery. I work with our docent and intern programs, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Vanessa, I'm going to turn it over to you to let the participants know a little bit about some housekeeping that we have going on.
Sure. So as you see on the slide, we just want to make explicit some community norms, just the kind of safe and respectful space that we want to create today during the program. So we ask that you respect others and their opinions, consider your own privacy and that of others, avoid inappropriate material and statements, cyberbullying will not be tolerated, and please be present, patient, and compassionate, and most importantly, have fun. I also want to mention that this program is being live captioned. So if you'd like to view the captions, you can enable the captions using or clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And I also want to mention that this program will be or is being recorded. So if you turn your camera or microphone on, the audio or video feed from your device is being captured. So if you currently have your video on and you don't want to be captured in the recording, you might want to turn it off. And we will engage with each other today using the chat box. So at some point later in the program, you'll be asked some questions. So please use the chat box to share your responses.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I think that's actually a perfect segue to our warm-up question. So our warm-up question, as Brianna shared, was about a time that you have helped the environment. And I'm loving all the responses coming in. I know Brianna already mentioned we have people here from all over, but I'd love to share some of our responses before we get into our first object. And so Tessa's from Germany, and they have not eaten meat for 26 years and tries to avoid using plastic. Kaylee is from Rock Hill, South Carolina, and consistently takes part in recycling on their campus. So we have a lot of recycling and comments about plastic, but really all different types of ways to help the environment. Erin from DC shared that she composts, a couple composts, vegetarians, and garbage, all different ways. So thank you, everyone. If you shared your response, if you haven't, you're more than welcome to keep doing so. We love to see all those ways that you've helped the environment. Brianna, do you want to take us to our first object that we're talking about today?
Yes. Vanessa, if you could change us, move us forward, thank you. So to revisit, we have this guiding question for the evening, which is how do ongoing, and by ongoing, I really mean things that are happening right now, how do ongoing environmental efforts inspire us to engage and take action, not just in our communities, within our own families, within our own schools, within our own local areas, but even beyond that. So what are the sorts of things that, that we can do in our communities and beyond? And the way that we're going to start diving into this question is by, as I said before, taking a look at those two objects from our respective collections. So we are going to start with a portrait in the Portrait Gallery's collection, but I'm not going to show you initially the entire portrait. So what you see on the screen now is just half of the portrait. So I'd like to invite you to take a close look. Think about what it is that you are looking at. And when you're ready, to type your initial observations in the chat. And to reiterate what Vanessa had said previously, we will ask you for the duration of our program today to respond to our questions and questions that you might have for each other in the chat, since we are a larger group. So what is it that you are taking a look at? And I see people are already starting to put in responses to the chat, which I love, including some wonderful little wave emojis, which I think is making me very happy. So anyway, we have a kelp forest. We have somebody who's actually seen the entire portrait, which we will get to in just a moment. It's looking like we're seeing a saltwater aquarium, and maybe that's because we see the lines of the metal that would hold together the glass. It looks like a beautiful blue ocean. Right, we're starting to see various fish and sharks. Perhaps this is a shark tank. We're starting to have questions. Is it an aquarium? From some, and definitely it's an aquarium from others. Oh, and I love this one. And I think this one I want everybody to hold on to. A view from the deep and looking towards the surface, right? So we're thinking about this, this perspective that we have as we view this portion of the portrait by looking up, okay? Phoebe, was there anything else that you saw that maybe people might have missed? Anything that stuck out to you?
You know, it's as people point out in the chat, I always notice like all of the variety of fish and of marine life that's in this part of the portrait. But one thing that I'm always drawn to is the layers of fish, of different plants, of the water, and just how much there is. My eye always kind of finds something new, and I'm always really drawn to really just the layers that I can see in this part of the painting.
Yeah, and right, whenever I take a look at this, I get drawn to the variety of colors that we are getting to see, again, just in the top half of this portrait. So Vanessa, if you will forward the slide, let's take a look at the bottom half of the portrait. Now remember, we are the Portrait Gallery, so of course we are taking a look at likenesses of people. So what more observations do you have now as you're taking a look at this half of the portrait? What additional things do you notice? What additional things do you see?
When I look at this part of the portrait, my eye immediately goes to those bright orange fish. And then I kind of step back and I see, without much more context, I see what, looks like a woman, and the pose that she's in is very strong, and I think she's very knowing.
Right, right. And Juliana is noticing that the light is darker from this bottom portion of the portrait, and the colors feel perhaps a little bit more rich. But I definitely agree with you, Phoebe. That orange of those Garibaldi fish, it really it pops, right? Even if it's not what you are expecting to spend time looking at it, you can't help but take that peek at those three fish. And then we're starting to also see ways that we're thinking about Julie Packard's expression, that she looks solemn and wise, that she has amazing fashion sense, that the colors that she's wearing are starting to match a little bit with the colors of the tank. Nina's saying the fish, they look like they're looking at her, which is a really great observation. Let's see, and what else? And again, this idea about color choice, right? So thinking about why the artist is using the colors that she's using, and again, the way that she is capturing light at the top of the portrait, and then at the bottom of the portrait, capturing sort of those darker, richer colors. Okay, let's take a look at the whole portrait now. So this is a portrait of Julie Packard, who is the founding and only director of the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California. She has made being the director and being a marine biologist and a conservationist her life's work. This portrait was commissioned by the Portrait Gallery in 2019 by the artist Hope Gangloff. So Gangloff, and if you're interested in zooming in even more than we did with looking at the top half and the bottom half, Jerry has included the link to the image on our website, so you can take that closer look should you choose to. So the artist, Hope Gangloff, is known for her colorful, stylized portraits. And after she was commissioned to create this portrait, she spent a week making sketches and photographs of Julie Packard against the backdrop of the aquarium. Now, what we see here is the aquarium's kelp forest. So Julie Packard is standing directly in front of it. And this kelp forest is housed in a massive open air tank with the windows measuring nearly 28 feet high, making it one of the tallest aquarium displays in the world. And what the tank does is it offers visitors a diver's view of a vibrant kelp forest, which, as we've seen and as you've already observed, is abundant with fish. We see the kelp, et cetera, et cetera. In just a little bit, Jerry will put a link to the kelp forest cam at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, so you can see it in action, which is great. But if we could move to the next slide, I'd like to decode some of the really important visual elements of this portrait. So outside of just taking a look at the whole image, what we have now are 6 zoomed in sections. And I'm wondering if there are any fish that look familiar, and if you might know what they are. And I will just say, while I'm giving everybody a chance to respond in the chat, when we commissioned this portrait, when the Portrait Gallery commissioned this portrait of Julie Packard, Julie Packard said yes right away, for sure, that she wanted to have her portrait created. But then her first question was, can you find an artist who paints fish? And we certainly see that, right, with this portrait. Okay, so I'm starting to see, and feel free, Phoebe, to chime in if I'm missing anything. Juliana is saying that perhaps she sees parrotfish. Ken is seeing the California sheephead, which is has the sort of dark blue black head with the pink body, right? And we see that in the lower left-hand corner. Maybe piranhas, tiger sharks. Okay, so some really great observations about the kinds of things that we're seeing. So there is the California sheephead, which is known for its rather large teeth. There is the Garibaldi fish, which Phoebe had mentioned when we first started having this conversation about what it is that we see and what we're drawn to. And those are the bright orange fish. Now, those are really important because they are a protected species, and they're the official state marine fish of California. And then on the middle right-hand side, we have rockfish, which I learned when I was researching for this program that they can live more than 150 years old, which pretty tremendous. At the top, we have leopard sharks, and these sharks are common among California's coast. We have the giant sea bass, who is known as the gentle giant, and the sea bass is in the upper left-hand corner, and they can grow to be 7 feet long and weigh over 500 pounds, but they are also critically endangered. And California has passed a series of laws to protect them from overfishing. And then we've got the kelp, and the kelp is the middle image on the left-hand side. And there's both giant kelp and bull kelp in the kelp forest aquarium. And both of these kinds of kelp, they grow in Monterey Bay. Giant kelp grows approximately 12 inches a day. And kelp provides food and shelter for the many animals that live in Monterey Bay. Okay, that was a lot of information about this portrait, but I felt that it was really important for you to see and take a look at and know exactly all of the very specific elements that both Julie Packard and Hope Gangloff decided should go into this particular image. Okay, so we've spent time with this portrait. We're talking a lot about color. I've seen a lot of comments come in about the way that Julie Packard is portrayed and the colors that she's wearing mimic the colors that we see behind her. So as you all view this portrait, what effect does the artist's color palette have on you as you look at Packard and the scene? And Phoebe, while we're waiting for responses, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I love those, the leopard sharks and the Garibaldi fish. My eye was going to those again. I think those are my favorites in the portrait. You know, when I look at this and look at the colors, I feel a lot of joy when I reflect on this color palette. And I think that for me, that comes from where the colors, they're so vibrant and they're almost glowing. And the way that Gangloff has painted, where the sun is kind of shining down through, I always, every time I've looked at this, I make a personal connection to like a time I've been to the beach or a vacation I have when I've just been like, oh, like the sun on the water and just how wonderful that is. I also think, and one of our participants noted at the start of the program, the view, we're kind of like looking up from the bottom up towards the top. And it makes me think like there's so much that I'm yet to learn about what's under the ocean and what like we can't see from that surface, as even just as we go further down in the kelp forest. As you said, there's so much to see even in just this one tiny snapshot of
Right.
what that could look like, what
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah, and I'm looking at some of the responses from the chat about, the colors, making Deborah feel calm, that there's this sort of glowing energy and vibrancy to the portrait. And then we've got, the bright and the neon, and then just this idea of blending, right? And a seamless integration. And when I think about that idea of seamless integration, it makes sense that Julie Packard is being portrayed in this way, because it allows us, right, as the viewers of the portrait, to begin to make these really wonderful connections between the object and Packard's life. And there's just this really wonderful visual unity, I think, that happens as we're taking a look and learning more about Packard's life. So on the note of learning a little bit more about her, I'd actually like to take a moment and read to you all some of Packard's words. Probably, gosh, I guess maybe it was in 2020, Julie Packard and Hope Gangloff, they participated, they were interviewed by the Portrait Gallery's director, Kim Sayat, for a podcast, our Portraits podcast. And so I have this really wonderful quote from Julie Packard that I'd like to read to you. And I know that this is a program all about the visual, but I'd like you to just all close your eyes for a moment and just listen to Packard's words. Without a healthy ocean, life on Earth could not exist. I mean, when you think about it, the ocean, aside from covering nearly 3/4 of the planet, 99% of the living space on the planet is in the ocean. I mean, by volume, it's a much, much bigger story than that. The ocean is our lungs, it's our pantry, it's our playground, it's our driver of vast amounts of commerce, it's transportation corridors around the planet, and of course, it's a huge source of inspiration and joy. So as you hear her words, as you listen to her words, and as we've taken this time to look at this portrait, what resonates? What resonates with you? How can we begin to connect her words to what we see?
Well, people are giving a chance to reflect and share in the chat. I think the part of that quote that really resonates with me is that 99% of our living space on this planet is in the ocean. That's like an awesome number. It's just like so big and for me, almost like incomprehensible to imagine just how much life is in the ocean. And I'm always, well, I'm really struck by that, and that really resonates with me, of just how vast that is, and that our perspective of my day-to-day life is just so small compared to 99% of the world's living space.
Right. Thank you, Phoebe. Right, and Juliana had commented again that your eye, right, goes upwards towards the sun. So I want to give you just a tiny little bit of information sort of about Julie Packard's trajectory before I hand it over to Phoebe. So I had said previously that Packard is the founding and only director of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. But in the late 1970s, after earning her master's degree in biology, she chose to focus on environmental action, and she helped transform a dilapidated fishing cannery into the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And that was in 1984. Today, the aquarium draws millions of visitors each year, and Packard continues to work as the director. And in her words, she aims to give voice to the ocean, to have people realize that our lives truly depend on the future of the sea. And I think one of the really wonderful things about the work that Packard is doing is the educational aspect of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, right? That you can go, you can visit, you can see the kelp forest cam online, you can be inspired by learning about all of these fish in California, about attending their educational programs. And then now we have this really wonderful portrait of Packard. So I want to turn it over to Phoebe because we're going to take a look at another object that asks us to think about conservation efforts really through this same sort of reciprocal lens. Phoebe, all yours.
Thank you, Brianna. And thanks to everyone who's sharing in the chat about that last prompt that Brianna asked. Vanessa, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So we're going to start with another object close look. And so in the chat, I would love if you can kind of switch your mindset, and we're going to look over this one now. And what are some of the things that you observe in this image? It could be the colors, the style of the image, maybe the subjects that you're drawn to. But let's take a moment and share what are some of the things that you see in this here. And while people are typing, I was going to say, Brianna, would you love to share yourself?
There's so much information, right? On this piece, everything from the words, that say U.S. Department of Agriculture, to the fact that we see two ducks flying over water, right? I mean, there's so much that can be pulled out of this. Oh, and I love that we're already starting to see wonderings coming into the chat as well.
Yeah, we have who signed this.
Oh.
I wanted lots of who signed it. I'll fill you in, I promise. Are the birds going for flight or going for food? So a lot of people have mentioned ducks. Obviously, we see some ducks here. So the ducks that are featured on this stamp, if you're not familiar with different duck breeds or identifying ducks, so these ducks are mallard ducks, and they're usually pretty easy to recognize. They're kind of that storybook classic duck. Their heads and necks are bright green, and the base of their neck has a white ring around it. And one of the things that I found out when I was learning a little bit more about mallard ducks that I love is that usually we think of all ducks as being pretty vocal, but particularly with mallards, which are featured here on this stamp, only female mallard ducks make that quack that we're so familiar with. And actually male mallards are usually silent unless they are fighting another male. But I would love, let's take a step back and look at more of this object. So Vanessa, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so the same object, but showing a little bit more. And I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you see now? Is there more information that you have that changes the picture or the story that you were starting to create about this object? What's different about it now that you're seeing the whole thing?
It's funny. I think that when we see stamps, right, we are automatically assuming that they are being used for a specific purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see it in this context, on this certificate, there's so much more information that starts to probably honestly lead to more questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see a lot of people are being drawn to the top that it says hunting certificate and stamp. So the stamp is affixed to, a hunting license essentially, but let me provide a little bit more context. If the duck stamp program is very new to you, So what we are looking at right now is the first duck stamp ever sold. It was purchased in Washington, D.C. on August 22nd in 1934 by J. Norwood Darling, known as Ding Darling. And that's actually the signature that is over the stamp. That's Ding Darling's signature there. So this stamp was designed by Alvin Meisner, but it's of particular importance to Darling because it's actually based on the etching Mallards Dropping In, which was created by Ding Darling himself. And so this stamp is part of a program. Like I said, it was the first federal duck stamp sold. It's part of what's called the Federal Duck Stamp Program, which Ding Darling helped pilot. So this is based on his etching, and it's also he was the first leader of this program. And this program, so beginning in 1934, the law required that every waterfowl hunter over the age of 16 purchase and carry a valid annual duck stamp. And that was part of the requirements for a hunting license. So the stamp itself was not the license, but it was required that you purchase it as part of that license application. So here, the stamp is affixed to Form 3333, and that's because the District of Columbia, where the stamp was bought, did not issue hunting license. You cannot hunt in the District of Columbia. So this specific Form 3333, it was intended for use by postmasters in situations where a stamp might not, a state, might not require a hunting license. So federal law still requires today the purchase of a duck stamp with a waterfowl hunting license, but this specific form 3333 isn't used anymore. Now it's a different form if you're purchasing it from a place that doesn't issue hunting licenses. So this stamp itself, it's a non-postage stamp, so you can't use it to send a mail. It is a conservation revenue stamp. So it's sold through the U.S. Postal Service. It's a required component to purchase when applying for a waterfowl hunting license. And then the money in this program, so the money that is used from the purchase then goes directly back to wetlands and waterfowl conservation in the United States. So the money from this stamp then is used for conservation purposes.
I have a question in the chat, and I thought it might be interesting to know the answer. It says, what is the number on the bottom? 5-11576.
That is an excellent question and an incredible close observation of this object. You know, to be honest, I don't know what that exact number attests to. My assumption is that it might be something about the number of the form itself, but that's an excellent question and a really great observation. So thank you, Jerry. I would love to go a little bit into more about this program and the impact of it and the whole idea behind these duck stamps. And so the first duck stamp, this duck stamp, in 1934, it cost $1. The duck stamp program is still in existence today. It's still a requirement when purchasing a waterfowl hunting license, and the cost of a duck stamp in the 2021-2022 season was $25. The stamp sales have raised more than $1.1 billion to conserve more than 6 million acres of natural wetlands habitat for waterfowl in the United States through the National Wildlife Refugee System. The wetlands acquired with duck stamp dollars, that conservation efforts help to purify water, aid in flood control, reduce soil erosion and sedimentation, and enhance outdoor recreation opportunities. The duck stamp program has been consistent since 1934, and through those years of consistency has made a significant impact on habitat conservation. I think those numbers alone speak to that. 1.1 billion is it's a lot of money. This program came out of the 1929 Migratory Bird Conservation Act. And that act was passed at a time when the continental population of waterfowl was at its lowest. So in 1929, that population was approximately 27 million birds. So the federal duck stamp program was initiated specifically to raise money for that wetland habitat and to take action because that population was so low. The duck stamp itself is also the only US stamp whose design is traditionally chosen through a public art contest. And so anyone can submit a design to the duck stamp contest, and the winning artist receives no money from the federal government. So it is a completely public art contest. So I've just shared a lot of numbers, a lot of statistics, and I'm curious, I've shared also a bit more information about the program. And so I'm curious what resonates with you about that. If you're new to this program, the duck stamp program, or maybe not, does it encourage you to take any actions? What are your initial reactions to it?
I mean, Phoebe, the statistics, they sort of were aha moments, I think, right? When you're thinking about $1.1 billion and conserving more than 6 million acres. I mean, gosh, just the long-term effect and power of an object so small, an unassuming object, if you will, right? This is why the power of context is so important, because I mean, I don't know if I wouldn't be able to get all of that information from just looking at this object itself, right? This is why it's so important to discover the power of objects and think about, gosh, why are they so important?
Mm-hmm. I'm often struck by something so small can have such a big impact, that it's like it's a tiny stamp, but is it really? What else does it do? Becky shared that they want to get a duck stamp someday. Jerry shared it's a very forward-thinking program. Janet wants to know what the current duck population is. I wish I had that statistic for you, and now I'm regretting not having it in front of me. It is above 27 million, though. I can tell you that it is not 27 million anymore. So, like Becky said, I want to get a duck stamp one day. And so the people who purchase duck stamps are not just hunters. They can be, like I shared, it's required for a hunting license, but many are philatelists, so people who are interested in and collect stamps. They're appreciators of art. This is a public art contest, or they're outdoor enthusiasts and care about that preservation and conservation aspect. The stamp itself also serves as a free entry pass into any national wildlife refuge. So if you do purchase a duck stamp and you're not going to use it as a hunting license, you can still use it to appreciate nature and to be in nature, and know that you can reap from those efforts. So we've taken a close look now at these two objects. I'm going to pause for a moment. And though I think that we can all say that their differences are fairly obvious, I would argue that they're also really similar. And so I want to now bring them together onto the screen. So Vanessa, if you can go to the next slide when you have a moment, because I'd love to start making some connections between them both, and then also revisit our essential question for the program. So Brianna, I'm going to ask you, our audience, please share. Just can you make what sort of initial connections can you make between the stories that we've talked about and between these two objects?
Gosh, there's lots of connections that I can make. I am actually just going to call out really quickly Vanessa's comment in the chat. In 2022, the waterfowl population was 34.2 million. So thank you, Vanessa, for doing that quick research.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah. So whenever I start thinking about connections, I think about the visual connections that can be made, and then I'm also thinking about the connections really of the stories that we've been talking about this evening. And I think that, there there is power in museum objects to be able to tell stories that we might not necessarily know about otherwise. And I think that that could certainly be said for these two very different museum objects, right? But then the other piece, when we start thinking about the stories that that we've been talking about, I mean, you and I talked about this a lot, that, these are stories of longevity, not of something that is a quick action, but of something that is happening over time. Conservation efforts of the ocean, conservation efforts of wetlands, that they've been happening over long periods of time. And so that longevity makes me think of resilience, right, for these sorts of environmental efforts.
Absolutely. I think that you brought up the word resilience, and I can absolutely make a connection between that idea and to these objects and the stories. The federal duck program has continually released stamps for the last 88 years. There's a new 2023 stamp coming soon. Of course, but in the first ever duck stamp, the one that we looked at this evening, sold 635,001 stamps. The first duck stamp to sell over 1 million stamps was in 1938. So that was 4 years after the inception of this program. They sold over 1 million, and the 2020 to 2021 duck stamp sold almost 1.6 million stamps. And that number will continue to rise because duck stamps are sold for 3 years. So you can get the last 3 years duck stamps at this time. And so, again, we see just every year that conservation effort, the amount of money, that amount of effort is just continually increasing and has that sense of resilience.
Yeah, and Phoebe, we've seen some really great comments coming into the chat, right? That, both of these objects, both of these stories are efforts at conservation, different, but both successful nevertheless. That we really are talking about a passion for the environment. And as Becky G said, and we talked about this, right? We are really looking at the long term, right? Not just for today, but over time.
Mm-hmm. So Maureen shared that she loves how commissioned artwork anchors both of these topics. And I agree, that's also something that really draws me to some connections between these two. And so my next question, my next quandary is, what is the power of art in service of conservation, and the power of that in inspiring conservation? How does that move us to act? I think that's a pretty big question.
It's a really big question. I think that right, when Julie Packard's portrait came into the museum collection, our director at the time said that we felt it was important to commission a new work of a leader in education, in research and activism, who could serve as an inspiration to a younger generation and to young girls in general. And we know that Julie Packard is excited to be part of a group representing, portraits of people who contribute to the sciences, right? And hopefully inspire others to pursue those careers in conservation. And it's right. It's an excellent idea. And Packard says that, obviously there's still major drop off, right, with girls pursuing science in middle and high school. And, she's really hoping that, this portrait can lead into, right, wonderings, ideas, inspirations about how others can be involved as well.
I think that that's just something fascinating that you bring up, and is something that I am really drawn to about Julie Packard and her story, and the story that this portrait encaptures. And similar to that focus on youth and education, young conservationists also play a role in the future of the duck stamp program in a way that is the same, but also a complete departure from the program. The program, like it's come up and also in the comments, has its roots in a hunting license, but the federal junior duck stamp program is a youth program that was started in the early 1990s. And that's a year-long program designed to teach wetland and waterfowl conservation to students from kindergarten through high school. And part of that program, youth submit their own duck stamp design, and a winner is selected in a national art contest. And then that winning stamp is available to purchase, and the revenue from the junior stamp contest goes back into local environmental education programs. So this program is same idea, the same value in a sense of the original federal duck stamp program, but it really takes the onus and puts that education aspect onto it and focuses on the youth and the role that that they have in conservation. One of the, in the junior duck stamp contest is so rooted in that art, and that's come up a lot. And so I do want to share another aspect of that power, that connection between art and these objects. So Vanessa, can you actually just go to the next slide for a moment? So these are more examples of duck stamps. These are more recent. The one on my left is from 2002, and then the one on my right is from 2005. So they are more recent. And one of the aspects of this program and its connection to art and conservation that excites me is the interplay of social justice action and art. And so as part of the program, artists create special collectibles called remarks by painting or drawing an image on one of the duck stamp. And that's what these are examples of. So the image can either mirror the design of the stamp or be a different design of the same species. And then these images are for sale or considered collectibles. And it's a celebration of the art of the duck stamp program. Sometimes what's called a tribute remark is also made, and that's when an artist creates an image on a stamp that's designed by another artist as well. So that art aspect of the program also continues to expand. So we've
Oh, sorry. I was actually just gonna just mention Deborah's comment in the chat because it really goes back to the question that we were talking about, right? With art in service of conservation, right? That the power of art is that it can make connections that other things can't do, right? So just today, Deborah says that there was a story on NPR about the big blue marble photograph inspiring Mae Jemison to go into space. So right, there is a power in these artworks, in these museum objects, to hopefully inspire future generations, right?
Yeah, I think similar to Juliana shared, that it makes our imaginations make a connection to the world around us. And I really connect to that comment, Juliana. Thank you for sharing that. I think when I look at the Julie Packard portrait, my imagination of what the kelp forest, it kind of just goes wild, and to start to imagine like the stories of everything that's behind her and her story and the connections to that. And similarly with the duck stamps, when I look at these remarks and the scenery that these ducks are in, and all the detail in the species, absolutely, I think that art can inspire us to take action in a new way. So we've connected now Julie Packard's portrait and her story in the portrait gallery. And so I'm curious, more specifically, for anybody else who wants to share in the comments, how does these portraits, the duck stamp, create pathways for young people to engage in environmental activism? Are there any young people in your life that engages in activism? Okay.
Vanessa, could you move us forward to the next slide?
So one of the ways that we just talked about, and specifically is action through art. And another one that I think ties into the duck stamp is monetary action. You can take action through funds, through donations, and things like that. And a third one that we've talked about is action through education. So there's all different ways that one can choose to engage and take action.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the podcast that I had mentioned previously, and that Julie Packard has said that we need all the talent and all the passion that we can gather to solve the environmental problems that are facing us today. That she says will become even more serious on into the future. So it's critical, right, to inspire our young people to think about these efforts, and hopefully by thinking about these efforts, they will then turn around as they grow up and think about or act on some of these ideas.
Mm-hmm. Ken has shared in the chat that artists can see the potential to have a conservation impact through their work, just as scientists or policy advocates can have an impact through theirs. And then right under that, which I think connects so well, Maureen shared that one of the inherent messages is in duck stamps, but I think into what we've been talking about is that small actions do matter. And whether, whatever toolkit you might bring, there's still a way that you can choose to engage and involve yourself in a meaningful way for you that does have impact.
Right. And I mean, at the beginning of this program, we asked, right, describe a time when you've helped the environment. And the things that you all said were, I mean, most of them were those small actions, right? And those small actions, as Maureen is saying, do really matter. And I think, right, too, when young people see adults doing it, they in turn will be inspired as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quick question in the chat that I thought was really good, and it's more about your process in choosing the selections and how do you narrow it down to 2?
Phoebe, oh my gosh, it was a long process. It's hard to narrow it down to 2. With this particular program, we have always tried to keep it to 1 object per museum, and so we started with a lot of objects, and we were all over the place with what we were thinking. But then it just, I don't know, serendipitously, it came together, right? Phoebe, is that fair?
Yeah, magic.
Yeah.
No, I think, when we first started kind of planning and having our discussions, there were many objects that we were looking at. And some of the themes that kept coming up are the things that we talked about today, this theme of like reciprocity and how do we use the environment and how do we give back to the environment. Themes of resilience kept coming up as well. A lot of connections to and youth and education and that aspect of it. And so I think once we started to really feel strong about those kinds of themes, it really became clear that these two objects could tell those stories and could spark some conversation about those themes. And I see, and there's a lot of duck stamps. This I ended up choosing this, the first duck stamp ever sold, because I think it provided a really powerful entry point into what this program is and how this program has grown.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, we're just at the 6 o'clock hour. But we want to close out with our sort of guiding question, right? How do these ongoing environmental efforts inspire us to engage and take action in our communities and beyond? So we'd love to hear more from you, what ideas you might have about this question. And Adrian, yes, we do. There is information about these objects on our websites, and Jerry has been placing links into the chat throughout the program. But you can also feel free to email me, and I can send along any links to you that you might need for your students. So what do we think? How do ongoing environmental efforts inspire us to take action in our communities and beyond?
I think that I'll jump in while I'm sure some people are typing.
Yeah.
You know, we started this by asking a way that you have helped your environment before. And we talked a lot about composting or recycling, maybe being mindful about like if you're like eating meat or not, right? People shared all different ways. And for me, learning about what others are doing to help the environment inspires me to learn more about that work and to see where can I contribute, and so what are my skills. I am not much of an artist, although the doodles on the side of my notebooks might disagree. But I'm an educator and I work in education, and that is a passion of mine, and being able to talk to young people and to engage in their curiosity is something that I can do. And so this question makes me think, okay, well, what are my skill sets and how can I leverage that to help?
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe. We've also had a couple of comments. One step forward can lead to another and another. And we're inspired by positive results. When we see others acting, it's certainly encouragement for us to act too. A positive feedback loop, which I love. So everyone, as we close out this evening, Phoebe and I just want to say thank you for spending this time with us.